Hello there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to make a very easy layer cake quilt. The layer cake I'm using here has been in my stash a long time. It's out of print. I saw one on Etsy though, but there are lots of similar layer cakes out there if you like this black and yellow color combo. And this quilt will work with any size of square and any color combo as long as you have some lights and darks. The first thing I did with this layer cake was sort into lights and darks. And what I'm doing here is pairing up one dark with two lights or one light with two darks. Next up, I am going to be cutting some of the squares diagonally in half. For example, this particular grouping has one dark and two lights, so I'm going to take the two lights and cut those in half diagonally. As I go through my entire layer cake and cut those pairs of squares diagonally, I'm going to be stacking them up just so it'll be easier to go through the stack and stitch them together. I'm letting you see all the cutting I'm doing here. Usually I cut some of that out, but this layer cake is so pretty. I did want to give you a chance to see all the different fabrics in this layer cake, and you probably have layer cakes in your stash or fabric that would work great for a quilt just like this. Here is my stack of layer cakes with some of them square and some of them cut diagonally, stacked up and ready to go to the sewing machine. To make this super easy quilt, we're taking one half that was cut diagonally. We're going to place that right sides together. But before we do that, I would suggest creasing or marking your pieces. So what I've done here with the square, I folded it in half. I did a little finger press so I can see a little crease, and then I'm folding it the opposite way. So again, I'm going to have those 4 creases in the center of the sides of my square. And now I can also crease my triangle that I cut from a 10-inch square, and I can match up those creases by placing these right sides together, and then I can stitch that 1/4 inch seam to attach. Next, I'm going to flip this unit around the opposite way. I'm going to attach a second triangle to the opposite side. There's plenty of room there. There's no overlap, so I can do 2 sides at one time. Now, I always like to use either chain piecing or assembly line construction if possible. So for this pair, I've placed the other two triangles that I'm going to be using later just on top. I'm going to set that aside. Another way you might want to mark the center of your outside of your square is to just take a little ruler and mark at the 5-inch line. Or if you're using a different size of square, maybe you've got 9-inch squares that you want to use, or 5-inch squares. I did a quilt with the 5-inch squares in this method first. Loved it. I used blues and greens for the centers and blues for the outsides, and it was just beautiful. Any color combination you can think of is going to work great. I think a black and white, gray and white type color scheme would look great. I also think a red, white, and blue would be really pretty. So here you see I'm just using my little 8-inch ruler and I'm measuring up each side 5 inches, making a little mark with my pen that's not going to show because it's within a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So pressing a little crease or making a mark with a pen, either way will work. You just want to make sure you find the centers to match these up. So what I've done here is match up 2 identical squares with 1 center square so that the 4 triangles are all going to be the same fabric. If you don't want to do that, you certainly could. The outside and the inside could all be scrappy. Just remember lights and darks. In this layer cake, I'm mixing up whether the center is light or dark. And in the previous quilt, I was using leftovers, so I also mixed up lights and darks. But you could also do all light for the center and all dark for the outside, or the opposite. The choice is yours, and whatever you make, it will be unique. Before we attach the next 2 triangles, we want to definitely press the 2 flaps on opposite sides nice and flat. I'm pressing my flaps away from the center, but you could press it either way. It's just if you've got a lighter fabric on the outside and it's going to show through and you're worried about that, you could press it the opposite way. Once I got the first 2 flaps pressed, I placed the other 2 triangles on top and set that aside. I'm going to go through the whole stack, get it nice and pressed, then I'll be ready to go to the sewing machine again to attach the other 2 sides. Again, I'm not cutting out any of the footage on this one just because I think it's fun for you to see all the different combos. So you can see some of them I have the light in the middle and some of them I have the dark in the middle, and it's just fun to see how these are going to come out. And here we're ready to attach the second set of triangles. And again, I kind of want to do a scrappy quilt now. Thinking about it, I've made the green and the blue one with the 5-inch squares. I've used this layer cake now to make this beautiful black, yellow, and white quilt. I really would like to see this done in a scrappy way. Now I have those scrap fabric bolts that I've used in the past, and I have not touched my 2025 bolt yet. Wouldn't it be fun to cut squares out of that fabric bolt and then find maybe a central color to go with those scrappy outsides, or perhaps use the scrappy for the inside and some kind of stash busting for the outside of the square. We'll just have to see what happens. With the opposite triangles attached now, you're going to notice there's some overhang from those first 2 triangles. You could, of course, trim those off right away, but I like to do assembly line construction or chain piecing whenever I can, so we're going to save that for later. Again, on this quilt, I'm not cutting out any of the footage. That's because you can pause the screen or slow down the playback speed. If you see a fabric you like or something you want to look at a little more closely, just hit pause, take a screenshot. With all the triangles now attached, I went through the entire stack and I just cut off those extra overhanging fabrics with my scissors. You could use a rotary cutter if you wanted to, but it was easy to just sit there and cut them off. I got all of the squares pressed nice and flat, pressing those opposite two flaps. Then it was time to square up the blocks. Now you might have an idea of what your blocks will end up with. Until you construct them, you just really won't know. You'll have a good idea, but depending on if you're sewing an accurate 1/4 inch seam or maybe you're a little scant or a little extra, your squares may be a little bit different. What you want to do is start out and maybe trim a square and then see if the rest of your blocks will fit with that. I have had situations where I've trimmed at a certain amount and got to a block that was too small, so I went back and retrimmed. For this case, it looks like these blocks are going to be trimmed to 16 inches. I have a big 21-inch ruler from OmniGrip, and I'm trying to center those points of my center on point square. So here it's that dark square. I'm kind of lining up 8 inches on the ruler with the middle both ways, horizontally and vertically. It doesn't always match up exactly, but then I'm kind of looking at the top and the right and the left and the bottom to make sure everything is going to fit inside 16 inches, making any slight adjustments or turning the block a little bit. Well, like I said, I have had cases where I've had to go back and recut blocks, so I wanted to check a couple more blocks just to see if it was going to fit within the 16-inch area. And again, it looks here like the outside is going to fit within the 16-inch square. If you want to pause the screen and take a screenshot, you're welcome to. If there's a block that you really like and maybe you want to make the whole quilt from those colors, that's a good idea too. One thing I want to talk about here is this project is so great because there is very, very little waste. You waste almost nothing when you make a quilt like this. So basically any size square will work. You just have a pair of 3 squares. You start with 3 identical squares, take 2 of them, cut them diagonally, and those will be the outsides of your square. And you can see that little pile of scraps I had, not much at all. Now it's time to lay out the quilt. I could lay this quilt out on the floor, but I think it's going to be pretty easy to do right here on my table. I'm going to be using 12 of the blocks that I made, and I'm going to lay these out on my tabletop 4 across and 3 rows. So I've got a dark, I've got a light right next to each other, and then I'm going to pair that up with another dark and another light. For the second row, I'm going to be pairing a light on the left and then a dark. And I'm laying them slightly on top of each other, overlapping, so I will be able to make sure that there are not 2 colors right next to each other or 2 identical patterns right next to each other. And I did use the whole layer cake, so I have 2 extra blocks. And when I got to the third row, I ended up pulling from those 2 extra blocks to kind of switch things around a little bit. Now it's time to sew these 3 rows together, and I am stitching 1 row at a time. So I'm taking the 2 right-hand blocks and the 2 left-hand blocks, attaching, and then attaching those 2 pairs together to make the row. Putting the rows together is so easy. These blocks don't need to be matched up except for those seams between the blocks. I am just nesting those seams between blocks as I go along. Here is a look at our finished quilt today with these blacks and yellows and white colors. Just beautiful. I love it. I love pairing the dark and the light together, just mixing and matching. Super cool quilt. If you are planning to make this quilt, leave me a comment. Let me know what color combos you see yourself working with. Do you want to make it scrappy? Do you just want to use up a layer cake or a few charm packs? Let me know. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you back again real soon.